My name is Miranda, I'm 32 years old, and I survived being pushed out of a helicopter by my own sister. Ashley and my husband Brent plotted my death to collect a $5 million insurance policy. For weeks, everyone thought I was dead while I fought to survive in the Alaskan wilderness. The look on their faces when I walked into my own funeral? Priceless. Before I dive into this nightmare, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe to join me on this wild journey of betrayal and survival. Growing up, Ashley and I were inseparable. Two sisters, born just 3 years apart. We shared everything: clothes, secrets, dreams. When our parents died in a car accident, I was 20, Ashley was 23. Our bond seemed unbreakable. It was just the two of us against the world, with the modest inheritance they left behind. Ashley was always the responsible one, cautious, a meticulous planner. I was more of a risk taker. I used my share of the inheritance to start a tech consulting business that flourished beyond my wildest dreams. Within 5 years, my company was valued at over $15 million, and I was featured in Business Weekly as one of their 30 under 30 entrepreneurs to watch. Ashley took a different path. She invested her inheritance in what seemed like a stable retail franchise, but a mix of a bad location, an economic downturn, and perhaps some mismanagement led to bankruptcy within 2 years. She lost nearly everything and had to start over with entry-level marketing jobs, struggling to pay off the business debts she'd accumulated. I never lorded my success over her. In fact, I offered to help countless times, but Ashley was too proud. "I'll figure it out myself," she'd say, with that tight smile that never quite reached her eyes. I respected her independence, but looking back, I should have seen the resentment simmering just beneath the surface. The sideways glances when I mentioned a new client, the slight tension when I talked about buying my lake house, the forced enthusiasm when I take her shopping and insist on paying. That's when Brent came into my life. We met at a charity event I was sponsoring for children's literacy. He was working the event as a financial advisor for some of the wealthy donors. Tall, with dark wavy hair and an easy laugh that made everyone feel special, Brent caught my eye immediately. He approached me with a glass of champagne and a compliment about my speech, one specific enough to show he'd actually been listening. "You connected educational opportunity to innovation in a way that got even the tech-averse dinosaurs in this room excited," he said, the corners of his blue eyes crinkling. "That's a rare gift." Our connection was immediate and intense. Within 3 months, we were living together. At 6 months, he proposed with a vintage emerald ring, showing he'd paid attention when I'd once mentioned that diamonds were too flashy. At our wedding, a year after we met, Ashley was my maid of honor, beaming beside me in the photos that would later be displayed at my funeral. What I didn't know at the time was that Brent's career was on shaky ground. He'd made some ethically questionable investment recommendations to clients that hadn't come to light yet, but they'd forced him to switch firms twice in the year before we met. His charm and his network kept him employed, but his income was nowhere near what he'd implied. When we merged our finances after the wedding, I was surprised to find substantial debt and minimal savings. But he explained it away as investing in himself through advanced certifications and temporary market setbacks. I believed him completely. That was my first mistake. Looking back, there were signs that Ashley and Brent had a connection of their own from the start. They laughed at the same obscure jokes, often finished each other's sentences, and sometimes I'd walk into a room to find them in a deep conversation that would abruptly shift when I appeared. I thought it was wonderful that my sister and my husband got along so well. Their closeness felt like a blessing. "You're so lucky," my friend Jessica told me once. "Most women have to deal with their husband and sister hating each other. You guys have the dream team." The dream team. What a joke that would turn out to be. The first real sign that something was wrong came about 2 years into my marriage. I came home early from a business trip to surprise Brent and overheard him and Ashley in our kitchen. They weren't doing anything inappropriate, just talking, but their voices had an intensity, a secrecy, that made me pause outside the door. "She'd never agree to it," Ashley whispered. "You know how controlling she is." "We don't have to decide anything now," Brent replied. but the opportunity won't last forever. When I walked in, they sprang apart like guilty teenagers, explaining they were discussing a surprise birthday party for me. I accepted the explanation, even though my birthday was still 5 months away. I wanted to believe them. Then, financial documents started to go missing from my home office: investment statements, insurance policies, the business succession plan I'd drafted with my lawyers. When I mentioned the missing papers, Brent suggested I was overworked and misplacing things. He'd even help me look, only to eventually find them filed in the wrong folders. There were strange reactions, too, when I talked about future plans. Mentions of our 5-year anniversary trip to Japan were met with vague enthusiasm from Brent. When I brought up expanding my business to international markets, which would require more travel for me, Ashley and Brent seemed strangely interested in the logistics of how long I'd be gone and how often. Brent started having unexplained absences, networking events that couldn't be verified, client meetings that mysteriously ran late, golf games that left no mud on his shoes. When I questioned him, he'd get defensive, accusing me of not trusting him. "You've been so suspicious lately," he'd say. "Is this how it's going to be? You, the successful one, second-guessing me at every turn?" The guilt trip always worked. I would back down, apologize, and remind myself that relationships require trust. I ignored the warning signs because I wanted to believe in the life I thought we were building. I didn't want to be the suspicious, controlling wife. I wanted to be the supportive partner who believed in her husband unconditionally. That unconditional trust would almost cost me my life. The invitation for the helicopter tour came as part of my annual executive retreat in Alaska. Every year, my company's leadership team would spend a week at a luxury wilderness lodge, combining strategic planning with outdoor adventures. This particular year, we were scheduled to take helicopter tours over the glaciers and remote mountain ranges, a highlight of the trip everyone looked forward to. 2 weeks before the retreat, during Sunday brunch at our house, I mentioned the helicopter tours to Ashley and Brent. "That sounds incredible," Ashley said, her eyes lighting up with what I now recognize as calculation rather than excitement. "I've always wanted to see Alaska from the air." "You should come with me," I suggested impulsively. "The company has a friends and family day. You could join for the helicopter tour and the evening banquet." I half expected her to decline. Ashley usually avoided my company events, saying they made her feel like a poor relation, but this time she accepted immediately. "I'd love a mini vacation," she said. "Things have been so stressful at work lately." Brent enthusiastically encouraged the idea. "You two haven't had sister time in ages. It's perfect." That same week, Brent brought up the subject of life insurance. We already had policies through my company, but he suggested we needed additional coverage. "Your business is growing," he argued. "We need to make sure everything is protected if something happens to you. What if a client sues? What if there's an accident?" His concern seemed reasonable. As the primary earner with a growing company, extra insurance made sense. I agreed to the policy without much thought. $5 million, which would go to Brent in the event of my death, with Ashley named as the secondary beneficiary. "Just in case," Brent suggested. The insurance broker seemed surprised by the amount and asked several questions about why we needed such extensive coverage so quickly. Brent smoothly explained it was for business liability protection and estate planning. His background in financial services made his explanation sound legitimate, and I was too busy with end-of-quarter reports to pay close attention to the details. As the trip approached, Brent became increasingly affectionate and attentive. He planned special dinners, brought home flowers for no reason, and kept telling me to savor every moment of the trip. At the time, I read it as loving support. Now, I recognize it as the guilty conscience of a man saying his final goodbyes. The night before I left, he held me longer than usual. "I need you to know how much you mean to me," he said, his voice thick with what I thought was emotion, but was likely just a well-rehearsed lie. Ashley gave me an unusual gift on the morning of my flight, an expensive bottle of perfume. "It's your favorite," she insisted, though I'd never worn the scent before. I spritzed it on to please her, not realizing she wanted me well-scented to mask any other smells later on, like fear or adrenaline. that might alert the pilot that something was wrong. When we arrived in Alaska, the sheer beauty of the landscape made me momentarily forget any lingering worries. The rugged mountains, the ancient glaciers, and the vast, untouched wilderness created a sense of peaceful insignificance. How small human troubles seemed against such a majestic backdrop. The morning of the helicopter tour dawned clear and bright, perfect flying conditions. Ashley seemed unusually interested in the details of our excursion. Which route are we taking? How long will we be in the air? How many people per helicopter? Are the doors removed for better pictures? Her questions seemed excessive, but I chalked her intensity up to excitement. We were assigned to a helicopter with just one other passenger, an older gentleman from my finance team who, at the last minute, complained of altitude sickness and backed out. That left just Ashley, me, and the pilot, a gruff local named Tom, who'd been flying these routes for 20 years. About 30 minutes into our flight, we were hovering over a particularly remote stretch of wilderness, miles from any trail or ranger station. Tom got a call on the radio and explained he needed to check something with the ground crew. "Just a quick pit stop," he explained, pointing to a tiny outpost below. "Fuel gauge is acting funny. Won't take more than 5 minutes." He landed smoothly on a small pad, turned to us and said, "Sit tight. Keep your belts on. I'll be right back." The moment he was gone, Ashley's demeanor shifted entirely. The nervous sister was replaced by someone calculating and cold. "Let's get some pictures while he's gone," she suggested, unbuckling her seatbelt. The view from the doorway would be amazing. I followed her, trusting as always. She slid the helicopter door open, and the blast of mountain air hit us. I stepped toward the opening, camera in hand. "The light is perfect," I said, gazing at the wilderness below. "Perfect for what I need to do," Ashley replied. I turned, confused by her tone, just in time to see her expression harden with resolve. In that moment, her face became that of a stranger, cold, determined, with no trace of sisterly love. Her hands connected with my shoulders in a violent shove. There was no hesitation, no sign of inner conflict. I remember her eyes most clearly, flat and businesslike, as if she were simply completing a transaction. The force sent me stumbling backward, out of the helicopter. As I fell, our eyes met one last time. She didn't look away or show any remorse. Instead, she reached for the door handle to slide it shut, already moving on to the next step in her plan. And then, I was falling. The helicopter shrinking above me, the vast Alaskan wilderness rushing up to meet me. The human body falls at about 120 miles per hour in a free fall. But I wasn't in a free fall. My body tumbled and spun, creating drag. And then there were the trees, the dense pine forest that both saved me and nearly killed me. I crashed through the highest branches, each impact slowing my descent, but also dealing out damage. Ribs snapped, skin tore. A branch as thick as my arm slammed into my left leg, shattering my femur with a sickening crunch that somehow registered even through my terror. The final impact knocked me unconscious. When I regained consciousness, minutes or hours later, I couldn't tell. The physical pain hit me in waves so powerful, I threw up. My tailored suit was in tatters, one shoe was missing, and blood soaked the silk blouse I'd so carefully chosen that morning. But the physical agony paled in comparison to the emotional shock of what had just happened. My sister tried to kill me. My own flesh and blood looked me in the eye and pushed me toward what should have been my death. And Brent, he had to have known. The insurance policy, his sudden interest in the details of my trip, that strange goodbye. They planned this together. I screamed then, a primal sound of rage and betrayal that sent the nearby birds scattering from their perches. I screamed until my throat was raw, until the pain in my chest from my broken ribs forced me to stop. And then, lying there in the wilderness, I made a decision that would define everything to come. I would not die. I would survive, not just for justice, but for the sheer defiance of ruining their carefully laid plans. The first task was to assess my injuries. The shattered femur was the most severe, the most immediately life-threatening. I couldn't walk. And an untreated fracture like that could lead to a fat embolism, infection, or fatal blood loss. Using strips torn from my suit jacket and broken branches from the forest floor, I fashioned a crude splint. The process nearly made me black out several times, but I pushed through, focusing on Ashley's face as she pushed me, using my rage as an anesthetic. Next was shelter. The Alaskan wilderness, even in summer, turns dangerously cold at night. I dragged myself under a fallen log, creating a small, protected space that I lined with pine boughs for insulation. My watch, miraculously still working, told me it was late afternoon. I had maybe 4 hours of daylight left. Water would be crucial. I could hear a stream nearby, but I couldn't reach it with my broken leg. Instead, I ripped the silk lining from my jacket and stretched it over a dip in the ground, creating a collector for dew and any rain that might fall. As night closed in, the temperature dropped dramatically. I was dressed for a climate-controlled helicopter and a business meeting, not for wilderness survival. Hypothermia became my most immediate threat. I pulled every pine bough and piece of forest debris I could reach into my makeshift shelter, creating layers between myself and the cold ground. I wrapped my torso in the remnants of my suit jacket, my injured leg propped and elevated on a mound of collected moss. During that first night, drifting between consciousness and delirium, I had plenty of time to think. Why had Ashley done it? The insurance money, obviously, but was that all? Had she hated me all these years while pretending to be the loving sister? Was every shared birthday, every holiday, every late-night talk a lie? And Brent? Was anything about our marriage ever real? The questions circled like hungry wolves, but I pushed them away. The psychological autopsy could wait. Survival came first. Dawn brought rain, a blessing and a curse. I collected enough water in my silk liner to quench my raging thirst, but the dampness made managing my body temperature even harder. By midday, I was shivering uncontrollably, a bad sign. I needed to signal for help, but in this remote area, who would see it? The diamond earrings Brent had given me for my birthday became tools. I placed one on a rock where the sunlight might catch it and create a glint visible from the air. I kept the other as a cutting tool, using its hard edge to sharpen sticks and saw through the tougher material of my clothes for bandages for my numerous cuts. The second day brought a fever. Infection was setting in, either in my leg or in one of the many lacerations that covered my body. I chewed on pine needles, vaguely remembering reading about their vitamin C content and antiseptic properties. The bitter taste was strangely comforting. At least I was doing something, fighting back in some small way. By the third day, I was losing consciousness more frequently. The pain had become a constant companion, almost separate from me. I named it Ashley, which felt appropriate. In my more lucid moments, I fell back on my business training. Problem solving, resource allocation, critical path analysis. I had built a multi-million-dollar company from nothing. Surely I could survive this. I created mental flowcharts for different scenarios. If rescue came, what information would I need to remember? If the fever worsened, what were my options? If an animal discovered my shelter, how would I defend myself? The structured thinking kept the panic at bay and gave me the illusion of control in a situation where I had almost none. On what I believe was the fourth day, voices woke me from a fever dream about falling. At first I thought I was hallucinating, but the sounds persisted. Human voices calling to each other. Over here, watch the slope. How much further to the summit? Hikers on a recreational trail I knew was relatively close. With every ounce of strength I had left, I screamed, a hoarse, broken sound that felt too weak to travel more than a few feet. I tried again, louder, ignoring the stabbing pain in my ribs. The voices stopped. "Oh my God," a woman whispered. "Jared, call for an evac, now." The man fumbled for a satellite phone. "What happened? Who are you?" "My name is Miranda Taylor," I managed to say. "My sister pushed me from a helicopter 4 days ago. She and my husband are trying to kill me for the insurance money." Their expressions would have been comical under different circumstances. Shock, disbelief, and the awkward uncertainty of how to respond to such an outrageous statement. "Let's just focus on getting you help first," The woman, who introduced herself as Rachel, said diplomatically, "The rest can wait." The rescue helicopter arrived within 2 hours. The cruel irony of being saved by the very machine that had been the instrument of my intended murder was not lost on me. The EMTs were efficient and kind, expressing amazement that I had survived both the fall and 4 days in the wild with such severe injuries. As they loaded me into the chopper, I heard one medic say to the other, "Isn't this near where that corporate executive went missing earlier this week? The one who fell during a photo op? They're searching the West Quadrant, but no sign." My blood ran cold. They had reported my accident, but had deliberately misdirected the search efforts. Of course, Ashley and Brent would need a body for the insurance payout. They would have told the authorities roughly where I fell, but given the wrong coordinates to ensure I wouldn't be found until it was far too late. In the hospital, drifting in and out of a haze of painkillers and surgeries, I caught snippets of conversation between the nurses. "Poor thing, such a tragedy." "Husband is flying in from Seattle. Sister has already identified her belongings. Funeral is being planned for next week." They thought I was just another patient. They had no idea they were discussing my own death in front of me. Somewhere in the hospital's billing system, I was Miranda Taylor, attempted murder victim. But to the world, I was Jane Doe, a hiking accident victim found miles from where Miranda Taylor had supposedly fallen to her death. It was the perfect cover for what would become my greatest advantage: the element of surprise. I spent 3 days in and out of surgery before I was lucid enough to fully grasp my situation. By then, according to the first news reports I managed to catch on the hospital television, the search for my body had been called off due to hazardous conditions. The narrative was tragic, but straightforward. Successful businesswoman Miranda Taylor had accidentally fallen while taking pictures during a helicopter tour of Alaska. Her body was presumed lost to the vast wilderness. What struck me was how quickly Brent and Ashley had moved to solidify the story. There were already quotes from both of them in the news articles, heartfelt statements about their devastating loss, their appreciation for the search crews, and their request for privacy during this difficult time. Miranda lived life to the fullest, Brent told reporters, his voice supposedly choked with emotion. She was always chasing the next adventure, the next beautiful view. That she died doing what she loved is our only comfort in this nightmare. Ashley's statement was just as performative. "My sister was my best friend and my inspiration. I keep thinking about our last moments together, how happy she was seeing the glaciers from above. I will carry that memory with me forever." The calculated precision of their lies made my blood boil. I was still trying to process the betrayal when a new visitor entered my hospital room, not a doctor or a nurse, but a woman in a sharp business suit who introduced herself as Detective Lauren Rives. "The hikers who found you reported some troubling allegations you made," she said, pulling a chair to my bedside, "about being pushed from a helicopter by your sister." For a moment, I considered recanting. Who would believe such an outlandish story? But something in Detective Rives's direct gaze told me she wasn't there to dismiss me. "It's true," I said, my voice raspy. "Every word. My sister Ashley pushed me from that helicopter, and I'm certain my husband Brent was part of the plan." I expected skepticism, but instead, she nodded thoughtfully. "The coordinates where you were found are nowhere near where your sister and the pilot reported your fall. That was the first red flag. The second was the $5 million insurance policy your husband tried to fast-track yesterday, a policy taken out just 3 weeks ago." My heart hammered painfully against my broken ribs. "He's already trying to claim it?" "They are?" "Your sister, as the secondary beneficiary, is helping to expedite the process, given the unusual circumstances. Her story is that you were leaning out for a photo when a gust of wind caught you. The pilot corroborates it." "The pilot must be in on it," I said. "He left us alone on purpose." Detective Reeves made a note. "Here's where we are, Ms. Taylor. I believe you. But belief isn't proof. Your sister and your husband think you're dead, which gives us a unique advantage. If you're willing, I'd like to keep it that way for a little while longer while we build the case." And so began my official death, a strange limbo, where I recovered from near-fatal injuries while watching my own life be dismantled by the people I had trusted most. From my hospital bed, with Detective Rives as my ally, I learned the full extent of the betrayal. The insurance policy was just the beginning. Ashley had been named in my will as the executor of my estate should Brent and I both pass away, a detail I'd forgotten from our estate planning after our parents died. With me dead, and Brent potentially implicated if questions arose, Ashley would have significant control over my company and assets during probate. Digital forensics uncovered deleted text messages between Ashley and Brent dating back 18 months, charting the course of their relationship as it evolved from friendship to an illicit affair, and finally to a criminal conspiracy. "We need to move up the timeline," one text from Brent read. "Investors are asking questions about past recommendations. The Alaska trip is perfect." Ashley had replied, "Remote, dangerous terrain. Accident is easily explainable." There were also messages about the pilot, how much to pay him to look away at the right moment, assurances that he didn't need to know the full plan, only that they wanted privacy for a special sister moment near a particularly scenic area. The financial records painted an even clearer picture. Brent was in serious professional trouble. His questionable investment recommendations were far worse than that. He had been misappropriating client funds for years, shuffling money between accounts to hide the shortfalls. The scheme was on the verge of collapse, with regulators beginning an informal inquiry into client complaints. Ashley, for her part, wasn't just struggling financially, she was drowning. The failed business I'd known about had led her to gambling in an attempt to recoup her losses, creating a spiral of debt she could never escape on her marketing salary. My death would solve both of their problems in one fell swoop. The most chilling discovery came from surveillance footage Detective Rives obtained from my home security system. The night after my accident, Brent and Ashley met at my house, supposedly to comfort each other in their grief. The cameras caught them embracing in the kitchen, not in shared sorrow, but in celebration, glasses of my favorite champagne in hand. "To new beginnings," Brent toasted, with no trace of the devastated widower he played for the cameras. "To 5,000,000 reasons to smile," Ashley replied, clinking his glass before they kissed. Watching that footage from my hospital bed, something inside me hardened. The last lingering shreds of doubt, the desperate hope that maybe I had misunderstood something fundamental about what happened in that helicopter, it all crystallized into a cold, hard clarity. They tried to kill me. They thought they had succeeded, and they were celebrating. Once I was stable enough to be moved, Detective Rives had built a preliminary case strong enough for arrest warrants. But I wanted more than arrests. I wanted to see their faces when their perfect plan fell apart. "They're planning your funeral for this Saturday," Detective Rives told me. "A small private ceremony, just for close family and friends." "I want to be there," I said, without hesitation. She frowned. "That's not standard procedure in an ongoing investigation, and the victim isn't even presumed dead." "I need to do this," I insisted. "Not just for the case, but for me. I need to see them, to make them see me." What I left unsaid was my deeper need, to reclaim my power, to transform myself from victim to victor in one dramatic moment. After a great deal of debate and careful planning, Detective Rives reluctantly agreed. We would attend the funeral together, she as part of the investigative team monitoring the suspects, and I, disguised as a distant, out-of-town cousin, my face altered just enough by lingering bruises and strategic makeup to prevent immediate recognition. The plan was simple but effective. Observe, record, and gather any further evidence of guilt from their behavior and conversations at the service. Then, once most of the mourners had departed, we would confront them privately, with police backup nearby. Their reactions, and hopefully any incriminating statements made in a state of shock, would be recorded as evidence. As the day of the funeral approached, I braced myself for what I knew would be the most surreal experience of my life. Attending my own memorial, watching people grieve a death that never happened, and coming face to face with the architects of my murder. What I wasn't prepared for was how the experience would change me, not just in that moment, but forever. The morning of my funeral dawned with a fitting melancholy. The sky was overcast, threatening a rain that never came, as if time itself were holding its breath in suspense. Detective Rives picked me up from the safe house where I'd been staying since my release from the hospital. I still needed a cane to walk, my body a canvas of fading bruises and healing cuts. But would those visible injuries truly help my disguise? "Remember," I told myself as Detective Reeves drove us toward the small chapel Brent had chosen, "you are Malene Foster, second cousin on your mother's side, in from Chicago. You never knew Miranda personally, but you felt compelled to pay your respects." My transformation was subtle yet effective. My brown hair was dyed a muted auburn, colored contacts turned my blue eyes hazel, and I wore thick-framed glasses. Makeup had been applied to subtly alter the appearance of my cheekbones and jawline. The lingering bruises and the weight I'd lost from the ordeal further obscured my identity. Unless someone knew to look for me, and no one would, since I was supposedly dead, the disguise would hold. We parked a block away and watched the mourners begin to arrive. My throat tightened as I saw familiar faces, colleagues from my company, friends from college, neighbors from our street, all dressed in black, many openly weeping. These people truly believed I was gone. Their grief was real, even if its cause was a fabrication. Then they arrived, the stars of this macabre show, Brent and Ashley, pulling up together in his black BMW. They exited the car with a rehearsed solemnity, Ashley leaning lightly on Brent's arm in a display of sorrow. Her black dress was designer, new. I noted with a flash of rage, likely bought with the anticipated insurance payout. Brent wore a suit I had bought for him for client meetings, his handsome face arranged into an expression of dignified grief. "Ready?" Detective Rives asked quietly. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. We slipped into the chapel after most of the guests were seated, taking a place in the back row. The setup was tasteful. My portrait, a professional headshot from my company's website, was surrounded by white lilies and roses. An empty urn sat on a pedestal, as there was no body to cremate. From our vantage point, I could see Brent and Ashley in the front row, accepting condolences with lowered eyes and murmured thanks. Every so often, Brent would place a comforting hand on Ashley's back, or she would squeeze his arm in support, gestures that would look appropriate to everyone else, but to my knowing eyes, they revealed the truth of their relationship. The service began with soft music, one of my favorite classical pieces, I noted with a jolt. Had Brent remembered that detail, or was it Ashley, who knew my tastes well enough to include it? The thought that they had used their genuine knowledge of me to craft such a convincing performance made me physically ill. The minister spoke first, offering generic platitudes about life and loss. He'd never met me, and it was obvious from his impersonal remarks. Then came the eulogies. Ashley went to the podium first, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue. "My sister was my everything," she began, her voice catching in what any acting coach would recognize as a rehearsed break. "From the time we were little girls, Miranda was my protector, my confidant, my inspiration. She accomplished so much in her short life, building a business from nothing, touching countless lives with her generosity and vision." I listened in mounting disbelief as she seamlessly wove truths and lies together. Yes, I had built my business from the ground up. Yes, I believed in mentoring young women in tech. But the sister she described, this sainted figure who always put family first and never let success change her kind heart, was a character invented for this audience, not the real me she had tried to murder. "Our last day together was so special," she continued, her voice dropping to a reverent whisper. "Seeing the wonders of Alaska from the air, sharing that experience, sister to sister. I will cherish those final moments forever. Miranda died doing what she loved, seeking beauty, embracing adventure. That is how I will always remember her." The calculated cruelty of it, using my own attempted murder as a touching anecdote, made my hands tremble with fury. Detective Reeves placed a firm hand on my arm, a silent reminder to maintain our cover. When Brent took the podium, His performance was just as convincing. He spoke of our whirlwind romance, our shared dreams, the future that had been so brutally stolen by a tragic accident. He even managed to produce real tears. Whether from genuine acting skill or the relief of getting away with murder, I couldn't tell. "Miranda was the love of my life," he said, glancing down at his wedding ring. "I keep expecting her to walk through the door, laughing about how this was all some big mistake. I don't know how to live in a world without her light, her energy, her passion. But I know she would want us to carry on, to honor her memory, by living with the same courage and purpose that defined her life." Several of my friends spoke next, sharing genuine memories that tore at my heart. Jessica, reminiscing about our college road trip where we got lost in 3 different states. Marco, from my executive team, describing how I'd taken a chance on him when no one else would. My elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, tearfully recounting how I always shoveled her walk in the winter without being asked. These real moments of connection, juxtaposed with the theatrical grief of the 2 people who tried to kill me, created a disorienting emotional whiplash. These people truly cared for me, and I was sitting among them, invisible, watching them mourn. As the formal service concluded, the minister invited everyone to a small reception in the adjoining hall. The family requests that in lieu of flowers, donations be made to the Miranda Taylor Foundation for Women in Tech, which Ashley will be establishing in her sister's memory. I almost laughed out loud. They were already planning how to launder the insurance money through a sham charity. Their foresight was almost admirable in its thoroughness. Most of the attendees moved toward the reception, but a small group made their way to the nearby cemetery, where a headstone was to be placed, despite the absence of a body. This was the opportunity we had been waiting for, a more private setting for the confrontation. Detective Reeves and I followed at a distance, watching Brent and Ashley stand together by the empty plot. As the last few mourners drifted away after offering final condolences, they were finally alone, or so they thought. We approached slowly, my cane tapping softly on the cemetery path. Brent noticed us first, his face settling into its practiced, grieving widower expression. "Thank you for coming," he said automatically. "Did you know Miranda through her company?" "You could say I knew her intimately," I replied, my natural voice emerging for the first time that day. He frowned slightly, not yet recognizing me, but sensing something odd in my response. Ashley was more focused on the detective at my side, perhaps noting her professional demeanor, which didn't quite fit a mourner. "I'm sorry, are you—" Ashley began, her tone polite but wary. "Shocked that you used my attempted murder as a touching anecdote in your eulogy," I said, pulling off my glasses and looking directly into her eyes. The performance was impressive, very moving. The moment of recognition was everything I had imagined during my darkest hours in the wilderness and the hospital. The color drained from Ashley's face so fast, I thought she might faint. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Her eyes were wide with a primal terror, as if she were seeing a ghost, which in her mind she was. Brent recovered a fraction of a second faster, taking an instinctive step back. "This is some kind of sick joke," he managed, glancing at Ashley for support, but finding her frozen in shock. "No joke," Detective Reeves said, flashing her badge. "Just the miraculous survival of the woman you 2 conspired to murder." "Miranda," Ashley finally whispered, her voice a strangled gasp. "How? You can't be alive." "Disappointed?" I finished for her. "I survived the fall, Ashley. I survived 4 days in the wilderness with a broken leg and internal bleeding. I survived while you were picking out your funeral outfit and planning how to spend my money." Brent's shock was rapidly shifting to calculation. I could almost see the gears turning as he formulated denials, explanations, ways to twist this into a misunderstanding. "Honey, what are you saying? There was an accident. You fell. We've been devastated." "Stop." My voice cut through his pathetic attempt at a lie. "We have the text messages between you 2. We have the financial records. We have the pilot statement about being paid to leave us alone in the helicopter. We have surveillance footage of you celebrating my death. It's over." Ashley's survival instinct finally kicked in. She turned to run, but two uniformed officers who had been waiting discreetly nearby moved to block her path. Brent took a different approach, falling to his knees in a theatrical display of remorse. "Miranda, please, you have to understand. We were desperate. I made mistakes with client funds. I was going to prison. Ashley was drowning in debt. We never meant to hurt you. You just needed to kill me for the money," I finished coldly. "That is the definition of wanting to hurt me, Brent." As the officers moved in to make the arrests, reading them their rights with the empty grave as a backdrop, I finally uttered the words I had rehearsed countless times during my recovery. "Do you know what your biggest mistake was? It wasn't the sloppy planning or the obvious money trail. It was underestimating me. You saw me as a source of income, not as the woman who built a multi-million-dollar company on grit and intelligence, not as someone who would fight with everything she had to survive. You thought you were writing my ending, but you only set up the beginning of a story you're not going to like very much." As they were led away in handcuffs, Ashley silent and catatonic, Brent still trying to explain and justify, I felt a complex wave of emotions. Vindication, yes, but also an immense sadness for what I had lost. Not just the sister and husband who betrayed me, but the versions of them I had believed in for so many years. Detective Rives stood beside me as we watched the patrol car drive away. "That was quite a performance," she said quietly. "How do you feel?" I considered the question, leaning heavily on my cane. "Like I've just attended my own funeral and witnessed my own resurrection." "I don't think there's a word for that feeling." She nodded thoughtfully. "There probably should be." We walked away from the empty grave that would never be filled, at least not by me. The media would soon get wind of this extraordinary turn of events, and my private drama would become a public spectacle. But in that moment, walking slowly away from my own memorial, I felt a strange sense of peace mixed with the pain. In a way, I had died. The trusting woman who had stepped onto that helicopter was gone forever. But someone new had survived the fall, someone stronger, more cautious, and far less willing to mistake performance for love. The media frenzy that followed was inevitable and overwhelming. Back from the dead, CEO survives sister and husband's murder plot, the headline screamed. Every news outlet wanted an exclusive on what they were calling the helicopter conspiracy, a nickname I detested but couldn't seem to escape. Suddenly my face was everywhere, my personal trauma dissected for public consumption. Initially, I refused all interviews, focusing instead on the legal proceedings that would determine Ashley and Brent's fate. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Valerie Montgomery, warned me that cases like this, even with substantial evidence, could be unpredictable. "They've hired separate defense teams," she explained during our first meeting. "That's good for us. It means they're likely to turn on each other rather than present a united front." She was right. Within weeks of their arrest, the carefully constructed partnership between Ashley and Brent had completely disintegrated. The betrayal they had inflicted upon me evolved into a mutual one, each trying to minimize their own guilt by maximizing the other's. Brent's defense strategy emerged first. He claimed to be a victim of Ashley's manipulation, an embattled husband who had been lured into her plot through emotional coercion and lies. Her client was led to believe this was an insurance fraud scheme, not a murder conspiracy, his lawyer argued in the preliminary hearings. Miss Thompson convinced him that her sister would be safely rescued by an accomplice on the ground after staging the fall. He never intended for any real harm to come to his wife. Ashley's team responded with equal desperation. Mrs. Thompson was under the psychological control of Brent Taylor, who systematically isolated her from other relationships and exploited her financial vulnerability. She participated under explicit threats to her safety. Watching them scramble to paint each other as the mastermind was both vindicating and exhausting. The pilot, facing his own charges as an accomplice, quickly took a plea deal in exchange for testimony, confirming that both Ashley and Brent were involved in planning the crash, and that he was told I would only be scared, not actually pushed. The trial itself was a grueling 3-week ordeal. I testified for 2 full days, recounting every excruciating detail, from the helicopter flight to my survival in the wilderness and the confrontation at the funeral. Looking directly at Ashley and Brent in the courtroom, their designer clothes swapped for prison jumpsuits, their confident expressions replaced by desperate calculation, I felt an unexpected emotion. Pity. Not forgiveness, certainly not understanding, but a distant pity for the smallness of their ambitions and the emptiness of their characters. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts for both of them. The judge, citing the extraordinary calculation and coldness of the crime, sentenced them to the maximum penalties, 25 years for Ashley and 28 for Brent, due to the other financial crimes that had come to light during the investigation. As they were led from the courtroom, Ashley finally collapsing into sobs while Brent maintained a stoic facade, I realized the conclusion of the legal process didn't bring the closure I'd expected. Justice had been served in the eyes of the law, but my personal healing had barely begun. The months following the trial were a blur of physical and emotional recovery. My body healed gradually. The shattered femur required 2 additional surgeries and extensive physical therapy. But eventually, I progressed from a wheelchair to a walker to a cane to walking unaided. The physical scars would remain, but they faded from an angry red to a silvery white, becoming part of my new normal. The psychological recovery proved more challenging. I worked with Dr. Eleanor Rivera, a trauma specialist who helped me navigate the complex landscape of being betrayed by the people closest to me. What you're experiencing is compound trauma, she explained during one particularly difficult session. There's the physical trauma of the fall and survival, yes, but there's also the attachment trauma of having your fundamental trust violated by your primary relationships. Your brain is essentially reprogramming its understanding of safety. The nightmares were the worst, vivid reenactments of the fall, sometimes with variations where I saw myself plummeting from a great height, other times where I hit the ground instead of the trees. I would wake up gasping, my body convinced it was still falling. Dr. Rivera taught me grounding techniques, ways to remind my nervous system that I was safe in the present moment. Plant your feet firmly on the floor, she would instruct. Name 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. Remind your body where and when it exists. Slowly, the acute panic began to recede, though certain triggers remained potent. The sound of helicopter blades, unexpected drops in altitude, even the particular shade of blue that matched the Alaskan sky that day. While working on my psychological recovery, I also faced the challenge of reclaiming my professional identity. My company had been in a leadership limbo during my death and subsequent reappearance. Marco, my loyal COO, had kept operations running, but strategic decisions were postponed, and some nervous clients had taken their business elsewhere. The board called an emergency meeting upon my return, expressing concern about the company's stability, considering both the trauma I had experienced and the sensational nature of the case. "The publicity is problematic," one board member said delicately. "Investors are wary of being associated with such a high-profile scandal." "Problematic," I repeated, feeling a flash of the new anger that seemed to live just beneath my surface lately. I was the victim of an attempted murder. I survived against impossible odds. I helped bring the perpetrators to justice. Which part of that narrative is it exactly that concerns our investors? The room fell silent until Marco spoke up. "I think what Miranda is suggesting, and I agree, is that we can reframe this. This is a story of resilience, determination, and triumph. Those are values our company has always stood for." That reframing became our new direction. Instead of hiding from the publicity, we leaned into it on my terms. I gave a single, in-depth interview to a respected business journal, focusing not on the lurid aspects of the case, but on the psychological resources and problem-solving mindset that helped me survive both the wilderness and the betrayal. The same skills that build successful companies, assessing resources, identifying critical paths, maintaining focus under pressure, adapting to changing conditions, saved my life in that forest, I explained. and they are the same skills that will guide our company forward. The interview resonated widely, shifting the conversation from morbid fascination to professional respect. New clients sought us out specifically because of the resilience we demonstrated, and most existing clients recommitted to our services. 6 months after the trial, I made 2 major decisions that would shape my future. First, I established the Wilderness Survival Foundation, using a portion of my own funds, ironically, including the life insurance policy that was returned to me after the murder plot was revealed. The foundation focused on 2 missions: offering wilderness survival training to the public and supporting survivors of betrayal and domestic violence. Second, I began the process of meeting with other survivors of betrayal, people whose stories weren't as dramatic as mine, but who carried similar wounds. A former client whose business partner had embezzled funds and framed him for tax evasion. A woman whose sister had stolen her identity and ruined her credit. A man whose wife of 30 years had systematically turned their children against him with years of subtle lies. These connections formed the beginning of a support network that would eventually become as important to me as my professional achievements. By helping others navigate their process of rebuilding, I found frameworks for my own healing. A year after the helicopter crash, I returned to Alaska, not to the exact site of my fall, but to the hospital that had treated my injuries. I brought a substantial donation for the trauma center and spent time with the emergency team who had saved my life. "I didn't expect you'd ever want to see Alaska again," admitted Dr. Vinters, who had overseen my emergency surgeries. "It's not Alaska's fault that human beings can be monsters," I replied. "This place is part of my story now, the place where I died in one sense and was reborn in another. I needed to reclaim it." As I looked out at the majestic wilderness from a safe, solid observation deck instead of a helicopter, I felt a sense of perspective that had been missing in the post-trial chaos. The landscape that had nearly killed me had also provided the means for survival. The trees that cushioned my fall, the water that quenched my thirst, the shelter that protected me from the elements. Perhaps there was a metaphor in there, I thought, about how the very experiences that break us can also become the source of our greatest strength. Exactly 1 year after I had walked into my own funeral, I found myself sitting alone in the cemetery, facing the spot where the headstone bearing my name had once stood. The grounds crew had replaced it with fresh sod months ago, but I could still see the outline where it had been, a phantom rectangle marking the place I was supposed to rest, but never would. So much had changed in that year. My company had not only recovered, but expanded, launching a new cybersecurity division inspired by my newfound passion for preparing for worst-case scenarios. The Wilderness Survival Foundation had trained over 2,000 people in basic outdoor emergency skills and provided therapy services to dozens of betrayal survivors. My physical recovery was as complete as it would ever be. I no longer needed a cane, though my left leg ached predictably before storms. After sitting in the empty plot for nearly an hour, I drove to the cemetery where my parents were buried. I hadn't visited since before the helicopter crash. In fact, Ashley and I had been there together the previous Christmas, laying matching wreaths and sharing memories of childhood holiday traditions. "Hey, Mom. Hey, Dad," I said softly, placing fresh flowers between their headstones. "I don't know if you know what happened with Ashley. Part of me hopes you don't." The wind rustled in the nearby trees, the only reply to my words. "I keep wondering what you would say if you were here. Would you ask me to forgive her? Would you be able to forgive her yourselves? She was your daughter, too. You loved her just as much as you loved me." I traced my fingers over the names carved in the stone. I think a lot about nature versus nurture lately. We had the same parents, the same upbringing. Where did that darkness in her come from? Was it always there? Did I just miss it? Or did something happen to create it? Is there some darkness in me too, just waiting for the right circumstances? These were questions I had explored exhaustively in therapy, but I had found no satisfying answers. The uncomfortable truth was that human beings, even those who share DNA, even those we believe we know completely, remain fundamentally mysterious to one another. When I returned home that evening, A letter was waiting for me, forwarded by my lawyer, having made its way through the prison mail screening system. Ashley's handwriting on the envelope was instantly recognizable, the same neat, precise script that had addressed birthday cards and Christmas presents throughout our lives. For several hours, I left it unopened on the kitchen counter, going about my evening routine while watching it warily, as if it might contain the same danger its author once had. Finally, just before midnight, I slid my finger under the flap and extracted 3 pages of prison-issue stationery. "Miranda," it began. "No dear. No terms of endearment. I have written this letter 17 times. Each version felt more false than the last, probably because there is no way to authentically apologize for trying to murder your sister. Any explanation I offer will sound like an excuse. Any remorse I express will feel like manipulation. I accept that. I am not going to ask for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it, and asking for it would just be another selfish act. But I want you to know that in the endless hours of confinement here, I have finally begun to understand what I did. Not just to you, but to myself. I destroyed everything good in my life because I couldn't stand that you had everything I wanted. The jealousy started so small, tiny pinpricks of resentment when you achieved something that had been difficult for me. It grew so gradually that I didn't recognize the monster it was becoming. By the time Brent came into our lives, I was already so poisoned by it that his manipulation found fertile ground. That is not an attempt to shift blame. I made my choices. I looked my own sister in the eye and pushed her to what should have been her death. The person capable of that deserves to be exactly where I am now. What I am trying to say, inadequately, is that I see myself clearly for the first time. Prison has stripped away every distraction, every justification. All that's left is the truth of what I did and who I became. You survived against all odds. From what I've read in the articles my counselor shares with me, you are thriving. I am glad, not because it lessens my guilt, nothing could, but because the world is a better place with you in it. That is something I lost sight of for a very long time. I won't write again unless you want me to. This letter is not the start of a campaign for reconciliation. It is just the truth, finally, far too late to matter. Ashley. I read the letter 3 times before setting it down, my emotions so tangled I couldn't name them. Was there manipulation hidden in her words? Probably. Was there also genuine remorse? Possibly. Did it change anything? No. But something about having her acknowledgement, the stark, unadorned admission of what she had done without the courtroom gymnastics of blame shifting, provided a closure I hadn't realized I was missing. I didn't answer the letter that night, nor the next day, nor the week that followed. Instead, I brought it with me to my next therapy session. There, Dr. Rivera and I explored what Ashley's words meant for my healing, and what, if anything, I wanted to do about them. You don't owe her a response, Dr. Rivera reminded me. Your healing doesn't depend on maintaining any connection with her. I know, I said, but I can't stop replaying that moment in the helicopter, the last moment she was still just my sister, and not the person who tried to kill me. There was a split second before she pushed me when I saw something shift in her eyes. I've relived that moment so many times, wondering if I could have said or done something different. That's a common response for trauma survivors, Dr. Rivera said gently. To search for the one moment where you believe you could have changed the outcome. But Ashley's choices were never your responsibility. Intellectually, I know that, I admitted. But there's still a voice asking why I didn't see it coming, why I trusted so completely. Because trust is human, vulnerability is human. These are not weaknesses, Miranda. They are the very foundation of connection. That night, I made a decision about Ashley's letter. I could not, and would not, close the door completely. I would sit with the complexity of having a sister who was also my would-be murderer, a person I once loved who betrayed me in the most profound way possible. I would accept that both realities could exist at once, and that my healing did not require resolving this paradox. As for Brent, I felt nothing but a distant disdain. His betrayal, while profound, lacked the primal violation of a sibling's attempt on my life. He was my husband for 3 years. Ashley was my sister for 32. The depth of that history made her betrayal cut deeper, but it also made the aftermath more complex. In the weeks that followed the anniversary of my near death, I found myself entering a new phase of recovery, one less focused on processing the trauma and more on defining the life I wanted to build. The question shifted from, why did this happen to me? To, oh, who am I becoming because of it? The survival skills that had kept me alive in the wilderness became metaphorical guides for my new life. Just as I had assessed my resources and injuries after the fall, I now took inventory of my strengths and vulnerabilities with clear eyes. Just as I had created shelter from the materials at hand, I now built protective boundaries in my new relationships while still keeping myself open to genuine connection. I began dating again, cautiously and selectively. James, a civil engineer I met through the Foundation's wilderness training program, became a steady presence in my life. He approached my history without morbid fascination or excessive caution, treating my experience as a part of me, but not my defining feature. What impressed me most wasn't that you survived the fall, or even the wilderness, he told me several months into our relationship. It's that you chose to use what happened to help others. You could have vanished into a private life of justified paranoia, but instead, you built something meaningful from the wreckage. His perspective helped me see my own journey with more clarity. Survival in the wilderness was about immediate physics, splinting the broken leg, finding water, creating shelter, signaling for help. The emotional survival that followed was more complex and ongoing, acknowledging the grief, processing the betrayal, selectively rebuilding trust, and finding meaning in the experience. 2 years after the helicopter crash, I gave my first public speech about the experience at a conference for survivors. Standing at the podium, looking out at hundreds of faces who had all endured their own versions of betrayal and loss, I finally found the words to articulate what I had learned. We often talk about surviving trauma as if it's a return to who we were before, I began. But that's not how it works. You don't go back to the person you were. That person is gone. Not because they were weak or flawed, but because trauma fundamentally changes how we understand ourselves and the world around us. The question isn't how to become that person again. The question is how to honor what they believed in while becoming someone new, someone who carries the truth of what happened without being defined by it, someone who understands darkness more intimately, yet chooses the light anyway, not out of naivete, but out of conscious courage. I am not the woman who boarded that helicopter in Alaska 2 years ago. That woman trusted completely, loved unconditionally, and believed in the fundamental goodness of those closest to her. I honor her optimism and her openness. I mourn her loss. But I am also not just the woman who fell from the sky and crawled through the wilderness with a shattered body. That woman survived on anger and determination, on the urgent need to see justice done. I respect her resilience and her strength. I acknowledge her pain. I am what comes after both, a third version who embodies the trust of the first and the resilience of the second, but exists in a new space of chosen vulnerability and informed hope. This version doesn't trust blindly, but chooses to trust with caution. She doesn't love without limits, but loves with boundaries. She is not naive to the human capacity for betrayal, but she refuses to let that knowledge stop her from connecting with others. That is what survival truly means. Not just to continue existing, but to continue evolving. Not just to endure the fall, but to learn how to fly differently afterward. As I finished my speech to a standing ovation, I felt a sense of completion, not of my healing journey, which would be lifelong, but of the acute phase of my recovery. The story of the helicopter, the betrayal, and the wilderness would always be a part of me, but it no longer needed to be the main story I told about myself, or the lens through which I viewed every experience. There would be other chapters, other challenges, other triumphs. The woman who crashed her own funeral was now ready to attend the celebration of her new life, not as a ghost or a victim, but as the author of her own sequel. Have you ever suffered a betrayal from someone you trusted deeply? How did you rebuild afterward? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if my journey of survival and transformation resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that there is life after betrayal. Thank you for joining me on this incredibly personal story. Remember, even the deepest wounds can become the source of your greatest strength.